in social studies. Her thesis, branching out and examining the possibilities and challenges of a community garden expansion, was a participatory research project in collaboration with the North Central Community Gardeners and led to the development of the Branch Out project. Her work is committed to building more just democratic and sustainable food systems. So I'd like to thank Maegan for joining us today, and I'll let you take it from here. You should be able to share the screen, but I often forget to give people permission, so let me know if you have an issue.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you everybody for having me. Hopefully you ran an efficient meeting. That was very refreshing to witness. Definitely have been to some like 5-hour meetings, but so I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen here. And put this into full screen. Okay. Could folks just give me like a thumbs up or a yes in the chat if you can hear me okay and see the first slide of the PowerPoint?
Yep, actually, Maegan, it's great. Yeah, we can hear you and see.
Cool, great. Okay, so thank you so much for that introduction, Kirsten. As you mentioned, this presentation is based off of my thesis work for my Master's of Arts in Social Studies that I recently completed at the U of R. So just before I begin, I just have a few acknowledgements. So first, that this research was conducted on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And then also this work was participatory. It was something that we really built from the ground up as the North Central Community Gardeners. So I just have so much gratitude to the staff and the board of the North Central Community Association and all of the participants of the North Central Association, Community Gardens, and the Branch Out project. Because without them, this work would not have been possible, without the folks that shared their stories and really took a leap of faith with me and joined this Branch Out project. So thanks so much to all of them. And then also to my supervisor and committee members and everyone in the Department of Sociology and Social Studies who supported this work. And then also the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council and the Regina Public Interest Research Group who funded this work. So thank you to all of those folks. So just a quick overview. I'm first going to give some background on the North Central Community Gardens and our Branch Out project. So maybe just since everyone's mastered the raise hand function, could folks just raise their hand if they've like heard of the North Central Community Gardens or been involved in some way? Okay, cool. Awesome, yeah, so I'll just do a quick overview just so everybody kind of knows what we do and what we're all about. And then I'm going to talk a bit about my understanding of the food system, because I think how I understand the current dominant food system really influences why I do this work and why a lot of us in the North Central Community Gardens are doing this work, because we're really striving for food systems change. We really are trying to create a grassroots food system that does something different than the dominant food system, that feeds people better, that makes people feel more nourished than the current food system, that is a little bit more rooted in justice than the current food system. So I'll just give a quick overview of that. And I hope some of these words are kind of coming from academia, so I hope they're not like too overwhelming, but I'm going to try to explain everything in as much detail as I can. And then of course, I'm happy to answer any questions. And then I'm going to really get into these 4 C's of community gardening, which for me were the big takeaway from this research. And these 4 C's are really kind of what I want to hold on to as I continue moving forward with community gardening work. And then I hope that people that are kind of interested in community gardening can really rally around as being like 4 key outcomes of this type of work. And then with anything, there are still challenges. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that remain. And then of course, some of the visions for the future, because I think to be a gardener is to be an optimist, is to really see what the world could be. And there are some really amazing visions for the future coming out of community gardeners. So for folks who don't know, the North Central Community Gardens were really a grassroots initiative coming out of community members in the North Central neighborhood that started in about 2008. People in the community really came together, collaborated with the community association, and started building gardens on vacant lands and in public spaces. The gardens have really shifted over the years. So as the years went on, there were some vacant lots that then, got taken back to be developed into homes or what have you. But the motto has always been help yourself. So the idea is really to have gardens out in public spaces that belong to the community, that anyone can feel entitled to access, that the community gardens belong to all of us. So I know there are a lot of really, really amazing plot-based community gardens in the city. What we're doing in the North Central community is having these like open access gardens. So they're not assigned to anybody or anything. We like all come together for planting days, for harvest stands, for canning workshops, what have you, throughout the year. So going into the 2020 growing season, there were these 3 open access gardens. So there was the one at the Mama Maegan Center, which some folks might be familiar with. There was one at the Oasis Church, so on the corner of 7th and Garnet. And then there was a small one here at the Kitchener Community School. So having been the community garden coordinator since 2016, I really started hearing from a lot of folks that people wanted more access to gardens. People wanted there to be more of these open access gardens in the community. And they also wanted to be able to garden in their own homes, right? In their own spaces, both for themselves and for their neighbors, for their friends, for their family. So really over the last couple of years, we've been thinking about how to make this possible. Like, how could we expand the gardens? Where could we build more open access ones? How could we give people more access to gardening in their own homes? And what we came up with was the Branch Out Project. And I ended up naming it the Branch Out Project because I really think of this type of work as like growing a tree, right? Like the roots for the North Central Community Gardens were put down over 10 years ago and have just continued to grow. But then our tree has also really grown and expanded and branched out, if you will. So I really think of what we're trying to do here as like building a network, as building this whole community or whole ecosystem of people that are involved in the community gardens that can share plants, share seeds, share time, share knowledge. And then that's what really makes it work. So we had planned for this to happen in 2020. So being a master's student, I was able to get some research funding to make this happen. And then of course, COVID hit in March of 2020. So we really did start the Branch Out Project like in kind of peak COVID or like in our early pandemic society, which was interesting and had its challenges. But essentially in the summer of 2020, I just put out a survey onto our Facebook page. I sent the survey to people who had expressed interest in this. And in the survey, people were able to share general thoughts about the community gardening project, like share their experiences with maybe the Mama Maegan garden or the Kitchener garden or the Oasis garden, talk about why they were maybe interested in community gardening, like what motivated them to participate in this type of thing. And then also on the survey, they could express their interest in either having a garden at their home, or if they were affiliated with a school in some way. So like if they were a teacher, a librarian, a parent on the Parent-Teacher Association, what have you, they could say that they wanted a garden at their school. And then I would meet with everyone who expressed their interest. We'd look at the space, we'd plan it all out. And then later that summer, we built 2 new school gardens and 6 new home gardens. So in the 2020 summer, we were able to build 8 new gardens. We got stuff planted in them. Some of them got in pretty late, so we weren't able to grow, produce much in them. But other ones actually did like kind of produce a crop that year, which was cool to see. And then I interviewed all of those folks. So everybody who got a new garden, I interviewed them to really get a sense of why they were interested in this, what motivated them. what they got out of it, what they saw as being challenges, what they hope for the future, all of those kinds of things. So I had 3 main research questions. And apologies again if some of this is sort of like a bit jargony, but I'll explain it in a second. But I was really interested in what are the opportunities for, possibilities of, and challenges to the expansion of community gardening in urban spaces under neoliberal capitalism. So if folks aren't familiar with that term, neoliberal capitalism is kind of the political economy that we're experiencing right now. So if we think of some of the rules that determine our politics and our economy, and also to some extent our social and cultural lives, right now we would consider what we are experiencing right now in Canada and largely in the world to be neoliberal capitalism. And I can kind of dive into that more in a minute. But in order to understand this question, I wanted to know what the relationship is between community garden expansion, food justice, food sovereignty, and these like counter neoliberal, anti-capitalist responses to crisis. So if we think about how people are experiencing hunger, how the COVID-19 pandemic made it very clear that our shelves can suddenly be empty, right? We're all experiencing the rise in food prices. So if we think of all of those things as crises, as sort of flaws in the dominant food system, I was really interested in understanding how community gardening fit into all of that, right? How is community gardening maybe a tool to achieve something that is more aligned with food justice and with food sovereignty? And then I was interested in who participates in community gardens in general. So if we look at like who's participating in the North Central community gardens generally, or in community gardens across Canada generally, who are those folks? And then also particularly in this Branch Out project, who are they and what do they get out of it? Okay, so that's it. So I think of the current dominant food system as sort of this dead tree. So this dead tree, I think, is really characterized by some things that aren't working very well. Some things about it do work really well. We do produce a lot of food. We ship it all over the world. I have mango juice in my fridge right now in Saskatchewan, which is awesome, but I think the food system also has a lot of flaws. So it's really characterized by this big agro-industrial model of trade liberalization. So we really deregulated a lot of the rules around food production and trade, which has had a lot of negative outcomes for developing countries, but developed countries as well. It's concentrated power among transnational corporations. So we're all familiar with, the Monsantos, the Walmarts. There are a few companies in the food system that have a lot of power. And then so with that, there's really been a consolidation of ownership among relatively few actors and away from individuals and communities. So we're really seeing that individual people and communities don't have a lot of power in the food system. We don't really get to determine how our food is grown, where, under what conditions, how it gets to us, how much it costs when it gets to us, where our grocery store is located, all of these things. And increasingly, food and land and every other input into the production and consumption of food is becoming like a commodity. It's more so becoming an economic instrument and less like a necessity for survival. And I argue that this dead tree of the dominant food system is really underpinned by those logics of neoliberal capitalism. So just for those who maybe aren't familiar, neoliberal capitalism is sort of characterized by there being less of a role of the state. So rather than have governments that are regulating a lot of these things, instead we see a lot of corporations, companies, and private entities being able to kind of determine and do whatever they want. But at the same time, we really promote the idea of individualism so that individual people could just really work really hard, or if they just made better choices, right? Or, well, if you don't like this thing, just go buy this thing instead, and that'll make all the difference. And then again, that things that are essential for life, things that are really necessary, like food and land and water, increasingly become those economic instruments. And then with this and all of the problems it causes, neoliberal capitalism really promotes a rollout of charitable programs. So we've really seen, and this might sound familiar to folks, we've really seen a lot of emphasis being put on things like food banks as a solution. So when people are experiencing hunger, a solution kind of becomes just for this corporatized food to be put into like a charitable model, and then be distributed out to folks who are maybe experiencing some of these injustices. But what I see as being a living tree is some of these paradigms of food system change. So two that I really like and that are probably familiar to a lot of folks here are food justice and food sovereignty. So when I'm kind of doing this work in community gardens, and I think a lot of us that are sort of out doing some work to grow food for our communities, or plant native plant gardens, or restore pollinator habitat and all of these things. I think there's like very similar goals here that align with food justice and food sovereignty. So creating local food systems that actually meet the needs of the people that live there, community responsibility and systemic change, justice for everyone in the food system, right? That no one should be hungry, no one should be food insecure, no one should be unsure where their next meal is coming from, no one should be getting sprayed with pesticides, right? And no ecosystem should be being degraded. And then food sovereignty, similarly, is for people's ownership and control in shaping the regulation, production, distribution, and consumption of food. That people can really have an active participation in democratic decision-making around food, reconnecting with food knowledge and skills, decommodifying food, and really having this collective struggle against social, cultural, environmental injustices. So this is really a lot of the goals here, and I think probably these will resonate with a lot of you. So as I interviewed folks, I really found that there were these 4 C's of community gardening, these 4 key themes that came out of it: capacity, control, consumption, and community. And a lot of these I found, like, I was almost shocked at how much what folks were saying aligned perfectly with like the food justice and food sovereignty movement. So first, thinking about consumption, there's a quote from Patricia here that's probably my favorite quote from all of the interviews, which is, "I'm gonna feed the world." So Patricia put a 12x4 garden box right in her alley. It's like accessible to anyone. She encourages people to go by and just pick from it. And she does really want to feed the world. She envisions herself and everyone in the neighborhood being able to grow enough food to like sustain ourselves. Consuming fresh produce was a primary motivating factor for many of the gardeners. They spoke to a lot of the challenges in accessing vegetables that were caused by food apartheid. So the fact that there's no grocery store in the neighborhood, transportation costs, COVID-19. People also really spoke to sort of that it's not just quantity, but it's also quality. So community gardens produce nourishment, right? It's not just the amount of food, but it's that food is so good to you, right? That food tastes good, that's food that you like to eat, that it feels good to like share food with your neighbors, to eat together outside at the garden. And then similarly, that gardening is a cultural or traditional practice. The community theme isn't really a surprise, right? It's in the name, community gardening, but still it was surprising how much folks spoke to the fact that they really did want to come together as a community, that they were doing this for their neighbors, for the people around them, for their friends, for their family. And it's particularly important in a neighborhood like the North Central Community Association that people are doing something so positive. They are really actively and publicly rewriting some of the narratives about their community. So you can see here from Nadine, we can either sit in our house and be scared we live in North Central, or we can start getting to know people and make it different. And then Naren also expressed how community gardens do move away from the charitable model, and that there's actually like cross-class and cross-status connections that are really vital for a good, striving community. So the fact that anyone is welcome in a community garden, everyone is entitled to be in that space, It doesn't matter who you are. Sometimes we have babies, sometimes we have people in their 90s, people from all walks of life, all have a place in community gardens. And then capacity. So again, thinking back to food sovereignty, really pushing for people to be reconnected to skills and knowledge around food. We see that in the community gardens. People are really able to share their skills and knowledge around food with others. We're able to share resources. As the community gardens, we're able to get the funding to get the soil, the wood, we share the seeds, we share the tools, we pass the rototiller around or what have you, right? And this is very important, I think, for like grassroots food system change, that we are actually changing the capacity of the community to produce food for one another. And then finally, control. This was a very key theme, I think, and again, echoes a lot of what food justice and food sovereignty, but people really talked about how they have greater control over food production and consumption. And although it might seem like a small thing to be able to decide what to plant in your garden and be able to eat that for a few months of the year, it actually gave people more agency over their own life, and they felt like a member of a larger project. And it gave people increased participation in the food system. So as Carrie says here, you have that little bit of control. So those are the 4 C's. But of course, there's sort of this 5th C, which are some ongoing challenges. It remains challenging to have reliable, consistent, affordable land access. Safety continues to be an issue, but I just want to make it clear that community gardens don't solve every single problem that ever existed in any space, which I think sometimes they can sort of be like misbranded or co-opted to sort of be saying that. But of course, the community garden doesn't solve every problem, and there's still issues of getting the funding to do these types of things, people in the community finding the time, having power, like of course the power to get the space, get the funding, all of those things, and then maintaining gardens is always a challenge. It requires like constant attention to have a garden and the constant engagement from folks. But people are so optimistic about their visions for the future and the potential of community gardens. People really are hoping for improved sustainability, so collecting rainwater, composting, using permaculture designs, having increased self-sufficiency, so being able to produce way more food in the community, right? Like really branching out even further. We now have, I think, 28 gardens. So we've built a lot more last year, and we're going to keep building more this year. And yeah, really just that it just keeps expanding. So this is just a final thought. The North Central Community Gardens and BOT participants are growing food not only for themselves, but for their broader community, are deepening their relationships with their neighbors and expanding definitions of community, are exchanging skills, knowledge, and resources to grow their collective capacity, and are exercising control over what and how they eat in what is becoming a grassroots alternative food system. So let's keep growing together. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Megan. Darylyn, I think you can stop the recording.